Welcome, folks, to this week's Check-In with the Doctor. I am, of course, Chris White, your host. And I have to say, the thing that I love the most about doing these sessions is I get to talk and meet with some of the most interesting people. And this week's guest is certainly no exception. Mr. Tony Francetic is the SE manager or an SE manager with Thomson Reuters. And he and I met about, I don't know, maybe a month ago after I've seen a number of posts on LinkedIn, and I was delighted when he agreed to come and be our guest today. Tony, how are you, sir? Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, absolutely. Pleasure's all mine. I appreciate the opportunity. Doing well. Sunshine and beautiful day.
And you mentioned, I have to say, so I'm based here in Leesburg, Virginia, which is just outside of DC. And I have to say, today's one of those days that I wish I was not inside. It's like low 70s, very little humidity, which is unusual for me. Now, I know you're based in Michigan. Do you mind taking a minute and just telling our guests who you are, a little bit about yourself and your background?
You bet. Yeah. So based in Michigan, as you said, I work out of our Ann Arbor office for Thomson Reuters. My background, I think, is one of the interesting things about how I arrived at the spot that I am, because my original schooling was in journalism, which I'm definitely not in journalism anymore. The path has kind of wound its way through different opportunities in apartment management. I built the house with some family members. I did a little bit of everything. We're in a machine shop. I was all over the place. And then I got into apartment management specifically. I spent a little over 5 years with that, and got to a point where I'm like, I can do more than just kind of, get college students in and out of housing. And I went back to school and was leaning more on the technology side of the house, and got into Thomson Reuters actually with an internship that turned into a full-time role in the support division. Wow. So I was in the call center first, and then from there transitioned to a trainer. So now I was traveling around the country and working with customers who were implementing our software. Then I moved along into training management, and then still under the training wing, the solutions consultant team then, which was called sales infrastructure. That's the wonderful thing about our industry, is there's so many different
interesting
titles that play with things.
Yeah.
But no, then we actually transitioned under sales a couple of years ago, and then I've gotten to my point in my current role. So
yeah,
an interesting path for sure.
That is quite the journey. You started in journalism. Did I hear that right? You studied journalism. Interesting. And did you have a job in that industry at all, or did you do anything in particular with that education?
Yeah, so I was a Central Michigan University, so fire up chips for any chips watching. But no, I worked at the student newspaper there for 4 years, the CM Life, and it was between Central Michigan University and Michigan State are the only two accredited journalism programs in Michigan, and that kind of drove me there. And yeah, I spent a lot of my time in the basement of Spa Hall on campus, and we cranked out a newspaper 3 times a week, and still had our normal duties as students to go to class and whatnot. But my dream was to be in the Chicago Tribune. Like All the President's Men was my favorite movie. Like that was my the hard news journalism focus was really something that I enjoyed. And truth be told, at the time, I was so ingrained in just the day-to-day of the newspaper life and working on a deadline, I didn't get into the digital aspects of really what journalism turned into today. And You've got HTML coding, they do all their own photography, they do everything now. So, they're literally jack of all trades. Yeah. But I was hard news in the office, burning the midnight oil, and that didn't work when I started to leave and look for actual job opportunities, because right out of college, they're light.
Yeah. And so at that point, you went back to school to get a technology degree?
So yeah, I would work full time for a little while first in the apartment management industry. And at that point is where I decided that, I can go back and figure out something that's going to lend for more opportunity. Yeah. And technology was there. What was really the focus? It was cyber defense was the degree title, but it was more, internet security and technology in general, which was interesting to me. And at the back of my mind, it was always, how do you engage with people differently? And to the technology field specifically, you usually get very, if I paint the broad brushstroke, right, you get technology folks that are a little more introverted and quiet and not as social and engaging. And I was not that person. So I always tried to find my way and find a path to get me where I can engage with people and ask different questions to get different results.
Yeah. And so when you joined Thomson Reuters, and it sounds like you've been there a while. How long have you been with them?
Coming up on 10 years. Yep.
Yeah, 10 years. So you were doing training, and they started flying you all over, sounds like the world, doing training. Now, what part of training did you enjoy the most?
And that's funny. I just brought this up in a meeting with my team not too long ago. I think that whenever I was implementing a software, you're going to have the normal, and we cater primarily to CPAs and accounting firms. That's our, tax and accounting software is kind of the specific area that I'm at in Thomson Reuters. But if there was a place I was going, the buyers, the partners of the company, the ones who made the decisions, if they didn't necessarily engage with their staff about that change, right. I sometimes walked into a room and got led into a group, and here's these 20 people, and the person shakes the hand and says, "Hey, here's Tony's going to train you," and then they leave the room, and I get just glaring eyes at me. So but I one of the things I always try to focus on, and truth be told, is find the person who is your dissenter, find the one who is most resistant to the change, and find a way to connect with them and see that it's going to be valuable. And I think at the heart of it, that's I certainly like helping businesses transition and be more efficient and successful, and seeing people grow and have that opportunity to either grow their business or spend more time with the family. That was at the kind of core of it. But selfishly, I always wanted to turn the dissenter and get them into the evangelist.
I love that story. And honestly, what I hear you saying is that even though you were training, even though this was in theory post-sales, you were walking into an environment where you had to do some selling of your own. You had to sell yourself. You had to sell the idea of this new solution that was being rolled out, from the sounds of it, by a management team that may not have communicated to their team, or was rolling it out to a team that was resistant. And it reminds me of, I don't know if you've read Daniel Pink's To Sell Is Human, but his position is we're all selling, even teachers are selling. And that's really the position you were in those situations, right?
In a lot of cases, yeah. And I think that, anytime that you're thinking about change management, and people are resistant to change in general. If you don't understand the direction that you're going, that unknown is inherently scary. So people are going to resist to it. But you're exactly right, though. I think that anytime that you're transitioning how you do business, there's going to be that, reselling of it. And whether it's pre-sales, post-sales, I think that there are some overlaps in how you engage with people and kind of go back to that value proposition of what's it going to do for them.
Yeah. And I'm compelled to sort of double click on two of the things you've said for any of our listeners. First of all, your statement, people generally resist change. They're resistant to change. That is so important for us as sales engineers and pre-sales professionals to keep in mind. Whenever we walk into a room, and I'm so, I so fondly remember the days where we actually walked in a room, but whether we're walking into a room or joining the Zoom, if we're presenting a new solution to a team that may not be particularly either familiar with the solution or even on board, there's going to be a general resistance. And the fact that you had sort of the presence to identify the person who was digging in the most and focus and channel your energy to try to connect with and turn that person, I just think that's such a great lesson. So I think it's worth double clicking on that for anybody who may be listening. And incidentally, Tony, let me pause and welcome anybody who may be listening. I know we have people sort of joining in and out of these sessions, so we never know who's on. But if we do have anybody on, I just want to say hello. I welcome any of you to ask any questions of Tony if you care to. So Tony, you're out in the field, you're running these training. Just out of curiosity, how long was a typical training set engagement? Was it like a 2-day session, 3-day session?
Somewhere in that realm. Between 1 and 3 days is usually pretty common, but you're going to spend more than just a day with a group of people for sure.
Yeah. And how many days a week were you were you doing like 1 or 2 training sessions a week?
Yeah, I mean, it's cyclical. I mean, it followed kind of the tax life cycle of, during tax season, they're not really doing a whole lot of training implementation. Yeah. It's all that post-season. But yeah, I mean, we usually kicked off the early part of the year with like a what's new training where you go around and talk about enhancements to the software. And that was, go do a 4-hour session, fly to the next city, sleep, get up, do a 4-hour session, and did 4 of those in a week. Yeah. And that was, for a couple months. So that was how I initially got into training. Well, then when it was implementations, then you're more spending time with them and having that 2-3 day window. Right. And ideally it was probably every other week. It was challenging from a family standpoint because you're not home, but that was the job at the time. And since then we've all kind of been able to migrate around, and I've been blessed to be able to work from home for the last 14 months and spend that extra, I got a 40-minute drive into the office every day if I'm going into Ann Arbor. So I'm saving some time, I'm saving some gas money and spending time with the family. So I really can't complain.
Yeah. Yeah. So at what point did you make that shift to pre-sales from the training side to actually in pre-sales?
Yeah. And it was interesting because at the time that pre-sales team was under the training consulting division. So they were primarily supporting sales, but they were led by the training consulting squad. And I think it's interesting because there's an overlap, right? There's a presentation skill component of pre-sales. And I don't know that sales leadership is always the direct right path to own that. And it's unique because you blend a lot of those different divisions together. Yeah. The presentation in front of a customer and having the technical expertise and blending that together, like there's a lot that goes into it. But back to your question, I was training and then I was in management for the trainers. So I had a group that was just kind of coaching them on their presentation skills and working through that process. And then there was a transition in leadership, and the manager who had that pre-sales team exited the company, and they offered the opportunity. And I said, cool, I know nothing about sales. so let's jump in and do it. And it was, the divisions that I covered, we've got a small mid division up to a certain size, and then the large division, and I've got a team that supports both. And truthfully, it was kind of immersion therapy for the first 6 months or so. I tagged on with a couple of weeks with some of the large division sales reps that go into more in person. So I traveled around with them for a week and did how many firm visits and just interactions. And my background in the product was helpful because I could answer some questions here and there and seemed like I was useful and not just fly on the wall. Right. But, to me, it was, what's this relationship look like? Because from a post-sale perspective, everything was done. And to your point, there's still a little bit of that kind of reselling the value of it. But no, I wanted to understand at a deeper level, like what goes into this process, because the demo is a unique blend of technical presentation. It's not really training. It's not really support, but it kind of is and kind of isn't. Yeah. You've got the understanding of the marketing messaging to be consistent with. You've got probably product roadmaps to know long-term. So, I mean, that kind of blend of all of it was really, really interesting. And I didn't want to come into the sales division as an outsider. I wanted to look at it more of a partnership, because I think that was, at the time, it was a challenge by way of that pre-sales team not being part of the sales division. It was adversarial at times, because if you're not in sales, then you just don't understand, right? I think that's a common conception from the sales side. For sure. So it was interesting, and I wanted to make sure that I built that relationship from the ground up and spending the time with the reps that we were going to be helping out with the demos. Yeah. What
fears did you have, or what trepidations did you have most, sort of going from that? And I love what you said. Like, look, and by the way, this was sort of my story when I first got into pre-sale. Like, I don't know much about sales, but I know I'm good in front of a room, right? So I know I can do that part. What fears did you have going into, entering that role?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, the group that was there, I hadn't had any exposure to. Right there's a group of these solutions consultants at the time. I had to come in and try and establish myself first. And I think for us and my group particularly, we've got a pretty complex set of products that we offer. So from a solution standpoint, it's the product knowledge is always going to be a challenge to continually stay up on 15 major product lines. Yeah. So I think initially my knowledge in the product set probably set me off on a positive foot because I can answer some questions and help. But then, I dove right into the presentation side of it and wanted to spend time with them. But yeah, my fear was, who's this guy coming in from the outside in the training division and going to come into sales and think that they're going to direct the process? So no, I of course, that was the initial trepidation for sure, that it wasn't going to work at the time. So at DemoFest, I ran a panel with my old boss, Rob Beatty. And at the time, when I moved into the sales division, it was my first review. So a year under the belt, and was kind of getting my understandings of what he thought at the end of the year. And he goes, well, truthfully, I didn't know if you were going to make it. I didn't know if you're going to fit in, right? I came from the training side, and there's a different mindset when you're talking training. Totally. And it's not sales in a lot of ways. So, that kind of fear was allayed when he's just like, nope, you fit right in. You dove in and tried to understand everything you could, and has done a great job. So
that's awesome.
Took me a year to overcome said fear, but yeah, it all worked out.
Well, and I think we refer to that often as imposter syndrome. I think
Sure.
A lot of us sometimes sort of feel that. When you started going on sort of the road show with some of the AEs that you were working with and supporting, what were some of the key things that you learned that really sort of helped you make that shift?
So when I was in the training side first, so one of the things that I got coached up on early and had delivered consistently at TR is a kind of a tweaked presentation on crucial conversations, which is all about having those challenging conversations, and a big part of it is perception and labels. And I think any organization, if you go through and have a meeting with a marketing division, a sales division, a support division, and you try to talk through challenges that you see, it's always, well, sales this, or, oh, it's training that. And those labels kind of really define how people interact. And it's easy to dismiss not very nice behavior because you're talking about an entity and not the people that are involved in those divisions. So really, training on that and kind of having that at the heart, I wanted to understand what goes into that process so that I got a better handle on what that sales experience is. So it wasn't going to be, oh, well, sales just has it easy, raking in all the checks and all you got to do is talk to me on the phone. That's a grind. And that was the biggest thing, when you're taking a week and hopping from, 4 or 5 firms a day and traveling from city to city, that can wear on people. And to do that day in and day out, year in and year out, there's a lot of respect that I got really quickly for a lot of those sales reps that are out there in the field.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciate you saying that. Another thing that I say frequently when I'm working with sales engineers, we don't see all the work that happens just to get us in the door, right? We don't see the prospecting. We don't see all the phone calls and the emails and the no's and the, dealing with the gatekeepers and all that, just so we can get a ticket to the party, right? Sure. And to me, that's one of the heaviest lifts of being in sales, right? So yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I love this notion of perceptions and labels. You're right. We use terms like, oh, well, they're in sales, right? And then we have a certain perception, right? Almost a prejudice, right? A prejudge against or about, quote, those people, and in most cases they're not true, right? They're not correct. Sure. So no, I think they're true. What were some of your biggest surprises when you made the shift and really sort of found your sea legs in the sales side?
Sure. I think, coming into it, it was like you said, understanding kind of that sales division, kind of getting my feet wet there. But then when pre-sales, I was starting off, like I said, not really any clear direction other than I wanted to have my team be the best presenters they could be, have it be polished, have it be, have the technical expertise for it, make sure that what they were doing was providing value to move that sales along to the next stage. And then, after I kind of got the team to a level where they were, I don't want to say self-sufficient, but I do rely on them a lot. And I have a lot of trust that goes for that squad. The end of the day was, holy cow, I opened up and started to connect with people on LinkedIn and found a whole host of this pre-sales industry that I wasn't even aware of when I first took over the team. And then it's, finding different people to connect with. And since this point, I've gotten to know such a great group of people. You've got, there's the Pre-Sales Leadership Collective. There's all these different groups that are there, but like Don Carmichael and Adam Freeman that run, 2 pre-sales in a pod. You've got Peter Cohen, John Kerr, yourself. I mean, there's a whole host of these people that have just decades of experience in the industry. And that was where I first started to get into it. I'm like, man, there's so much more to this than just doing demos.
It's amazing.
And that got me excited, because then it's like, okay, well, if we're looking at things where this sales division specifically is trying to keep that as like, oh, they just do the demos, man, what potential is there to have a bigger influence in the company? And that's been my goal ever since, is to try and continue to expand that influence into the other divisions that could benefit from the insights that pre-sales deals with. How many customers do we touch? My goodness. I mean, you talk about a customer proposition team that's going to go out and do customer interviews, and they shoot for 6 a quarter. Man, we do 20 a day. So how many people are we touching to really, to gain that? And those are active, interested customers.
Yeah.
Right. You're not talking to an existing customer or a prospect that's not necessarily looking. It's a unique insight. And I think that there's a lot of that where the industry specifically has shifted in the last couple of years to have a spotlight on pre-sales as really a driver for business.
Yeah, it's so true. So what are some of the specific things then that you're doing to try to manifest that goal, that objective?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's kind of developing those relationships. And I feel like, and not just at Thomson Reuters, but there's a lot of it where, how businesses have adapted to, of course, the pandemic makes a certain spotlight on it. But even before that, when you're trying to look and adapt and grow in a technology industry where you're working with software, everybody's got their own individual goals, right? Marketing has targets that they've got to hit. Sales has targets that they have to hit. You got to support the customer through training and implementations. You got to have staffing needs. I mean, there's all these challenges, and it's easy, I think, from an organizational standpoint to kind of narrow that focus to say, well, how can we make sure that our division is successful? My real end goal is let's find ways to connect all of those divisions and look at that end-to-end journey of a customer from initial touch, whether that's downloading a white paper from a website, through the retention side, and they go through for renewing their software. But that's going to cover the gamut of the sales process, the implementation process, the customer service interactions, the support side of it, right? There's a lot that goes into it. And I feel like if the insights aren't there to help transition between those paths, you find that the individual departments are only worried about the individual departments. And that can be dangerous.
Exactly. Incidentally, it sounds like your dog's got a few objectives and goals of his or herself. So if you need to go quickly deal with him,
I'll run. I can
go deal with him or her. So folks, we're talking with Tony Francetic of Thomson Reuters, and one of the things I like to say is we need to be more human than ever before in our jobs. And this is a perfect example, because we're working from home, we're dealing with things like dogs, and I have plumbers come to the door, and my wife's downstairs on a meeting, and I'm like, guys, I got to go get the door. So, hey man,
life happens.
This is the
life
world.
Happens.
This is the world in which we live in, right? So,
you bet.
I was going to ask you a question as you were talking about building the different relationships with different teams, and being cognizant of the individual goals, and I'll say group goals, right? Marketing has their goal, and the BDRs have their goals, and product teams have their goals, and then the individuals within those teams obviously have their goals. Do you think that your team members, the people on your team, do they recognize the opportunity for them to become more strategic members of the organization? And do they recognize that opportunity in themselves?
Well, if they don't, I've been beating them over the head with a bat about it. and you know, but if you look at just, again, I've directed a lot of them to the same group of people that I mentioned, and you know, in the forum of pre-sales individuals. Honestly, to see something like Demo Fest that Consensus put on, have 3,500 plus people in attendance by way of practitioners and leadership. There's a huge following of people, and to get that exposure, I think, has really opened their eyes up the potential that they do have. I think that we've been, and this is probably on me for asking a lot of them, but to kind of show what value is there by way of projects and interacting with those divisions and working to try and show what we're capable of. And I think that you're always going to be challenged, and you've got the same thing, whether Vivin runs a report or Consensus runs a report on the compensation and workload. Like there's a lot of factors to consider, because my biggest challenge lately is pushing too hard if there's not a business decision to compensate effectively. I can say all day long, my future vision is a lot like modeled after Todd Jansen, what he did at Salesforce, and break that team into a strategy team that's got dedicated people focused on engaging with those other divisions and making those strategic moves, and then a delivery team that's the ones that are more client facing. That's kind of the vision that I see down the road as the team continues to grow. And I say that going from when I took the team over, I had 8 staff that were part of the group, and now I've got 22 solution consultants.
Wow.
So in the last 5 years, more than doubled the growth of the team. That's allowed for several things that we've been able to do, right? We've specialized by workflows, of if it's tax or audit or advisory and business management. Like that, there's some things that have certainly already come to fruition, but I toe that line of how much do I push to try and plug into those other areas of the business if that's not going to be something that is recognized as the role of the job, right? And back to the original point, pre-sales is not just demos,
right?
And when you could, maybe it's a job description, job role, job code, whatever they want to call it. If that is written or assumed to be that kind of narrow window of just doing a demo, well, it's easy to say, well, great. Well, why should they be compensated at a level of a sales rep or differently? So it's that's the one thing where I feel like they do have an understanding of what that potential is, and a lot of them have kind of adopted some of those projects and taken them under to really shine. One of the things that I've found really, really interesting is there was a couple of teachers that I hired. And, no tax and accounting background, no industry background, but they're teachers, and they have been fantastic solution consultants to be able to take that ability to present and describe and try and connect with people in different ways. Well, then if we're going to go in and work with our onboarding squad or something with training and education of sales reps, they are all over it. So there have been a handful, sure, that dive right into those projects and are fantastic at it by way of their backgrounds. Yeah. And that was the other point I was going to bring up too, is just the uniqueness of pre-sales. We attract a very unique type of person, right? And if you look at, we've got people that came from the sales industry where they had the sales background and they just transitioned away from it. I have people from the support background where they had the technical knowledge, but it wasn't the right seat on the bus, as my old boss Gene would say, right? They weren't in the right spot. So that allowed them to kind of transition, and pre-sales was the place that they fell, where they turned into, a star. And you're able to take this multifaceted role and allow people to expand and do different things than just maybe a singular focus of a sales quota or, a support role. It's always unique. It's always different. You find different people to engage with. You're ever changing in technology. So there's always something to adapt and learn. And you find those people who are natural learners. They want to learn, they want to connect with people, they want to grow, and they want to make a difference in somebody's lives. And that's a pre-sales.
Yeah, that's such a great summary. And you're so right. I don't know of too many other roles in business that give an individual the opportunity to call on so many different skill sets, right? We have to have technical chops, as I like to say, right?
Sure.
We have to be technical to the extent necessary for the solution that we sell. We need to be curious by nature. We need to be learners, to your point, right? We need to be problem solvers. We need to be people person. If you can't connect with and engage with and relate to people, you may struggle in this job. But we also need to have a sales acumen as well. Because at the end of the day, we do have a very clear responsibility. Yep. And that is to help close business, right? So, we can't. I had one sales leader to say to me one time, I think my sales engineering team, part of my sales engineering team is a sales prevention team. We need to do something about that. Like, yes, we definitely need to do something about that. So no, I mean and you're right. People in this role come from so many different backgrounds and industries and sort of paths, which actually I wanted to ask you this. Is there anything that when you think back to your early days of being a journalist and studying journalism, is there anything in specific that you find that you can use or leverage in either your role as an SE manager or even if you were out in the field as an SE?
100%. Yeah. I mean, the thing that I enjoyed about journalism was, again, you're engaging with different people, you're trying to find ways. And I think that you're forced to go through a process of understanding how to read people, right? In a college campus, if I was tasked to go out and get responses from people about something that changed at the university, right? And I go walking around through the campus, if I see somebody that's walking with their head down, back then they didn't have the phone to look at like they do today. But if they're walking around looking at their feet and they're not really kind of up and around and visualizing what's going on with it, well, that's not going to be a person who's going to engage really well. If there's somebody that's, at least going to make eye contact and maybe nod and say hello, that's a really good trigger, right? And that's just that was the first thing that kind of got me into that. I always want to find out, how, can I read that person right enough to get to the spot where I can ask a question and get a result that I want? Yeah. And to leverage reading people. There's a book, and I'm losing the author off the top of my head. It's What Everybody Is Saying. It's a former FBI profiler.
I think I know who you're talking about. I might even have the book.
It's a fantastic book.
Yes,
it really is.
Where he talks about
Joe Navarro.
The island. What's his name?
Joe Navarro.
Yep.
Joe Navarro. Yep. So that one kind of I worked at that, and when I was doing the train the trainer, when you talk about adult learning and when you're now adapting this to where we're going to go in person to a customer, there's the body language and reading people has to be a component of it. But to me, it's the questions, right? At the end of the day, if you're going to look at discovery and what is important to that person and how are you going to connect the value of what you're selling to their needs, it's discovery at the end of the day. And yeah, journalism primarily, right? It's how do you ask the right question? One of the things that I tried to, when I originally took the team over, was trying to coach through it to make sure that when we start those conversations, which has now then adapted to the sales organization at large, if you're going to ask a question like, well, what is important to you? Oh, I want to be more efficient. Cool. And they jot that down in the notes and they give it to the solution consultant and they say, cool, they want to be more efficient. And we turn around and say, well, what does that mean? Right? That's pretty narrow. So my mantra really for them and for the sales reps and really anybody that's looking to try and get to that next level of discovery, ask the next question, right? I think that there's a lot of it where we try and move so quickly through things because of quotas, because of targets and everything that's in front of us. It's a fast moving pace and it's easy to say, cool, they want to be more efficient. They want to, make more money. They want to do whatever the buzzwords are going to be. But at the end of the day, if you just, tell me what you mean by that, exactly. Right? Ask that next question to follow it up and let them start to talk. Yeah. And not just CPAs and accountants, but CPAs and accountants really like to start talking because their job is very behind closed doors, right? They're not doing a whole lot of interaction like that unless somebody's coming in to maybe connect and drop off their tax forms. But get somebody talking and about something that they're passionate about, and they'll open up to you.
Yeah.
Solutions consultants specifically, right? Because if you look at what we deal with in a lot of cases, sales reps, they're going to try, and like you said, there's a lot of that we don't necessarily see behind the scenes of the work that they have to do to engage with the customer and build that relationship and get them to a point where they can open up about those challenges. But sales primarily, I mean, if you go out to, anything that you want to purchase and a salesperson comes up to you in a store, doesn't matter if you're looking for, a new stereo or a car or what have you, that salesperson comes up and you're just like, okay, well, I want to make this decision, right? I don't want to be sold something. Exactly. So sales reps have a real big challenge to overcome. And when you have a solutions consultant who then joins the call and is able to connect with the person, say, you know what, I'm here to talk about what this can do for your business. I'm here to talk about how we can, answer some questions for you. I just want to be able to show you what this can do. And there's those defense mechanisms that just start to lower and they open up so much more. Man, engage sales engineers early in the process to try and find ways to get those right questions out of the gate and set them up for more success. It's everything just shifts all the time. That's what's interesting about it.
I love it. Well, and some of what you said is so powerful. I mean, and I say this to SEs all the time. It's actually unfair. It's true, but it's unfair to our sales counterparts. They are guilty until proven innocent.
Yep.
Period. In most cases. Why? They have commission breath, right? Because everything they say is tied to a commission. And so people are less inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. Whereas the sales engineers, they look at us as, oh, well, they're the technical person, right? But we're the secret weapon, right? Now we can't use that to our advantage necessarily, but we can use it to the advantage of the team, and by the way, to the advantage of the customers, right?
Sure.
Like customers need to open up in order for people to make valid and appropriate recommendations, right? So it's a two-way street.
It sure is. And I think that anytime that you look at that connection with the customer and trying to understand needs and then show that value and where it's going to solve those needs or challenges that they have, I look at my team and I say, we basically serve two customers, right? There's the account executive that we're working with. And that's, our goal is to drive sales to the next stage, right? At a minimum, I'll move it to the next stage, hopefully close it. But that's the plan is to get that sales process move forward. But there's also then the customer that comes into play. And to the point of, a firm or a customer who's going to open up more to an SE, it's hard because sometimes you're going to find where those situations are at cross purpose, right? Maybe that by uncovering some additional conversations about their workflow and what have you, the solution that we're planning to pitch is not going to be the right solution. And then we pivot and we go a different direction, and that might not be the original plan, and it may not be as advantageous for the sales rep that's tied to it. But I think that it's trying to find those ways to blend that, where we're not trying to make the decision that's going to be best for the commission. Yes, we want to get the commission to come through. Yes, we want to make sure and support the sales division, but the customer, who would then have that potential for add-on opportunities and different conversations down the road and renewals and retention, all those things that play along with it, that customer relationship becomes equally important. And I think that's another one of the things that makes pre-sales solutions consultants such valued resources, is they're able to identify and pivot and still have the best outcome that's possible.
Totally. Well, and it's all about prioritizing the customer, right? And
sure.
Incidentally, so Charles Rubin chimed in. By the way, Charles, good to see you. Thanks for joining. He said, becoming the trusted advisor to the client compared to the salesperson. And I happen to know, Tony, that the concept of the trusted advisor actually happens to be one of your favorite ideas. What does that term? And by the way, that term almost is overused at times. What does it mean to you and your group?
Yeah, and this is echoing your conversation last week or so with John Kerr, and just came out with his new book, The Trusted Advisor SE, right? Like that's fantastic. I just actually, as soon as I listened to you guys going through it, ordered it on Amazon, our wonderful situation, we get it 2 days later. But I think that the pre-sales, the opportunity for that division to be that trusted advisor, and that term, you're right, fairly overused, but can expand to a lot more than just the customer. I do feel like at the end of the day, if we're going to work with a customer and try and move that sale forward to the next stage, we've got to build trust. We've got to have that understanding that we're not trying to sell them. At the end of the day, sure, that's our goal, but we want to do that by way of connecting the value to the need. And I think when you look at expanding that to then the different organizational structures that I was talking about earlier, can we, as a sales engineering, pre-sales industry, by way of what we need to know to be successful, product roadmaps, marketing strategy, messaging, right? Examples and stories from the other customers that we've engaged with already. Those things build a resource for an organization that should be looked at as a trusted advisor. I don't think we need to go out and develop marketing campaigns for marketing. That's the job, right?
Right.
Can we offer advice and influence on what we're hearing in the industry to tweak that to make sure that the messaging is consistent? I really think so.
Yeah.
And the same holds true for product development and roadmaps for long-term strategy for products.
Yeah.
If we know and what we're hearing in the industry from basically somebody who's at a competitor today, and they're interested in us, and they're asking for features or examples, whatever it might be, and it's not there yet, and we reach that critical mass of we're hearing this all the time, that should be solutions consultants, sales engineers, pre-sales, whatever you want to call them, should be trusted advisors to the product side.
Absolutely.
I mean, any other part of the organization where we're going to have that influence by way of what we hear from a vast part of the prospect phase.
Yeah.
That's to me where I feel like, while overused, it is an apt comparison or apt title to tie on to pre-sales for sure.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And again, the reason I ask is I do think people have different sort of definitions and the way they interpret it. And I think it's important for us all to sort of define for ourselves, what does it really mean to be the trusted partner? My definition, I sort of break it down into three things, right? The first is prioritize the customer. At the end of the day, we are always going to prioritize the customer. That's number one. Number two is no pressure, remove pressure, right? It's just the way we engage is without pressure. We're simply here to inform, to advise, to recommend, right? There's no pressure. And then the third is courage. Now, why do I use that word? It's the courage to say the thing that may not be the popular thing to say, right? It's the courage to take a stand. And sometimes it's saying things that our sales counterparts don't necessarily like to hear. Sometimes it's saying things that our customers don't necessarily like to hear, right? A lot of times, or sometimes, our customers think that they've got it all figured out and they're okay. The truth is they may not have it all figured out and they may not be okay, right? But you can't say those things until you've proven that I'm actually saying this for your best in your best interest, right? So, anyway, that's a mini soapbox on for me. Incidentally, Tony, let's do a quick shout out to Kerry Sokolsky. I don't know if you've met or spoken to Kerry. He's a coach in the pre-sale space as well, a previous guest of mine, and actually he spoke last week on comp plans, and I love what he says, right? Sales and pre-sales comp plans should be designed to drive the behaviors that are consistent with long-term customer value and success. Well said, Kerry, and it's good to see you as always. Tony, we've almost been 45 minutes, if you can believe that. So the time has flown by. I always like to close with just a couple quick sort of questions.
Sure.
So first one, can you think back to a demo that you had to give that went particularly poorly? And if so, why?
Sure. No, and it's funny too, because even before I was kind of exposed to that the pre-sales group as a trainer, imagine you've got a sales team of 200 plus, and there's 8 people supporting it, right? They were challenged for resources, but at the time. So I was a trainer, and I got pulled in to do a demo, right? I was not pre-sales, I was not a solution consultant, I was a trainer.
We're trainers. We're used to training people.
Right. And if you look at like what we try and coach people to, like, well, you don't do training, like don't go through and explain what you're doing and all the clicks that you're doing, stay high level. So I got like a super quick crash course from a sales rep to then go in and demo our tax program. And, I think that anytime you're in a presentation, there should be nerves involved. And people say, well, I don't want to be nervous. I'm like, well, you should be nervous if you want to do a good job, right? That's going to drive that behavior of just wanting to do well. And if you don't have nerves before you jump into a presentation, then something's wrong. You lost the care for it. So going into this, right, where there's a sales opportunity now on the line, where all my exposure was with post-sales, they had already purchased and I was just presenting. Now there's a sales potential. I was crazy nervous, defaulted back to what I knew, and I'm going through and explaining the drop-down menus and the clicks and where I'm going. And at the end of the day, it wasn't a dumpster fire, but it certainly wasn't what I would coach my team to do today. That's for sure.
I so love that. Well, and it's funny you should say that. I mean, I think all of us fall into the traps, right? When we feel the pressure, or maybe we get a question we weren't expecting, or things aren't going quite the way, we tend to just default to our sort of natural comfort zone, right? And for a lot of engineers, it's the technology, and like in your case, it's the training. It's interesting that you mentioned nerves and feeling nervous. And honestly, Tony, as often as I speak, I still get a touch of nerves, ranging from moderate to significant, depending on the situation.
Sure.
Right. But I read something a long time ago that has helped me deal with it. And it said, if you think about the physical reaction to anxiety, right? You feel butterflies in your stomach, your heart beats a little bit faster, you might get sort of sweaty palms. And then they said, think about the physical reaction to excitement. You get butterflies in your stomach, your heart beats a little bit. So this I think it was an article. The author of this article said, whenever you think you're nervous, or particularly like if you're speaking, if you can just shift the way you're perceiving that to excitement over nerves and nervousness, right? It just sort of changes the mental process. So anyway, that was good. It's incidentally, we're getting so many good comments. Kyle Henry shared a great note. Kyle, good to see you. Matt Elson, he's the head of or one of the founders of Emma 3D out in the UK. And I'm just going to say, Raja, I'm not sure I can pronounce any other part of your name, but folks, it's always good to see you live, and appreciate you chiming in. Tony, let's sort of switch the tables here. Have you been on the receiving end of a demo that was particularly effective? In other words, has anybody tried to sell you anything and you were impressed by the demo? And if so, is there anything in particular that stands out in your mind?
That's a good one. And, we've been holed up in our houses for 14 months. I'm trying to think of a good example of an opportunity like that. Oh, okay. So there's, I need to replace my back deck. Right. And we had bid out a couple different people to come and take a look and talk through the process. And honestly, you had the 3 different people come through. You had the first one who was, all right, here's the size, here's the amount it's going to cost, and here's what we're going to do, right? We can't do it and schedule it till later in the year. Not really making a connection to the needs there. You had one that kind of did a little bit deeper digging, but very, very similar to the first. And the third one was, what are you trying to do? There wasn't, the sales component of it. It was connecting to what was important to us. And, when me and my wife were sitting there talking and going through the process, and then they laid out very, very detailed what goes into it, what to expect, what to go into. And they were not the cheapest option that were there. But when you go through and you find a way to have that connection where they're really trying to understand what is important to you, that was what stood out to me. And honestly, when we made the decision, that's what we're going to go with.
I love it. That is such a great example. And just the fact that individual of that group started out with, what are you trying to do? Just tell me. And there are so many people, honestly, in all businesses that could learn so much from that just one line. Like when you get an inquiry, when you get a request, right? Don't lead with your solution.
Sure.
Lead with what they care about, right? Lead with trying to figure out, at the end of the day, what are we actually trying to accomplish here?
It's not about you. It's not about you. That's exactly. It's so hard though, because that's the mindset, right? We get excited. And I think a lot of really good pre-sales, they get into that mode of being excited and passionate about what they're trying to promote and show and connect value for, that they lose sight of that it's a conversation. Right? It's a presentation. I don't want to discount the fact that it is. You've got to make sure and be professional and represent the business. But at the end of the day, it's a conversation. And that's where it's all back to the questions and just, establish some rapport and some credibility and just ask some questions of what's important to them and watch them open up.
Absolutely.
Listen for the right things, connect where you can, but just make it conversational.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, it takes us back to your time in the journal, the journalism, world. And I wrote down, underlined, and have now circled 3 times. You mentioned questions, right? And believe me, I believe, first of all, I think discovery is arguably the most important part of our job. And it's all about asking effective questions. I also believe that the way in which we respond to questions during the demo, during the presentation, makes or breaks the deal. So to me, it's all about questions. So I absolutely love that. Okay, which takes me to my final question for you, and then we're going to break.
Sure.
If you could ask me one question, what might it be?
Oh, what's the next book you're going to write? I don't mean to throw on the spot there, but that's.
So I'm glad you asked. So I will tell you. I have two book ideas that I'm kicking around.
All right.
The one is going to be called The 6 Habits of Highly Effective Software Sales Teams, because I believe you can take the 6 habits that I wrote about, and rather than targeting just the sales engineers, you can target AEs and SEs working together. So that's one idea. The second idea is an SE leaders, SE management book, but the idea that I have is to actually have a sort of a book by committee kind of thing. So anyway, but I won't share any more about that. So that's sort of
fair enough. No,
those are the 2 projects that have been rattling around in my brain. So,
well, and I think that you're onto something with the initial idea too, because the partnership chapter, specifically in your 6 habits, that's one that I feel like if you're going to have a successful sales organization, there has to be that partnership between A's and SEs. If it doesn't exist, or it erodes, or there's challenges that face that relationship at large, that's what causes the rifts that are hard to come back from. So I think that any guidance and any insight that can help businesses transition and make that relationship as strong as it can be, they're going to be more successful. So I love it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Tony, thank you so much, man. It's really been a blast. And obviously you can see some of the feedback and comments we've had. Any closing thoughts from you, sir, before we wrap up?
I think that if there's one thing you can take away, there has to be trust at the end of the day. And that goes back to the partnership that exists there. I put a ton of trust in my team. I think that, probably more than I should at some points, but when I believe what they're capable of, a lot of times kind of letting them succeed on their own helps to build that confidence in themselves. So, at the end of the day, there's got to be trust with several factors. The sales organization that you're a part of, you got to trust your partnerships across the aisle with the sales reps. You got to trust the vision of the organization. You got to trust your leadership. So, I mean, that if you can find ways to strengthen trust across the organization, across divisions, with your peers, oh man, don't discount how important that trust factor can be. And connect on LinkedIn with as many people as you can in that pre-sales industry. If you're a part of it, continues to grow and be the direction a lot of companies are going to go. So I'm excited about what's going to continue to happen.
Awesome, man. Those are great words. And is it safe to assume that you've read The Speed of Trust?
Speed of Trust, yes, sir.
R. Covey.
Yeah,
excellent.
You betcha.
There's a few books in my life that I can honestly say have changed my life. That's definitely one of them. So, Tony, thank you so much, man. It's been an absolute blast for me and obviously our guests. And for anybody
Agreed.
that may have hung around or listened to the recording, thank you so much for joining. As Tony said, connect with him on LinkedIn. You know how to find him. And I know, Tony, you're also part of the Presales Collective as well, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Fantastic.
That was a
Tony,
pleasure.
so
It was a blast. Thank you.
I'll be sure to invite you back for another session.
Love it. Anytime.
Thanks,
Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Yep.